Welcome everybody, and welcome to another event in the Australia-Israel Scholar Seminar Series. Let me first acknowledge the fact that here, where we're hosting the seminar virtually in Southeast Queensland, this is a homeland of the Jagera people and the Turrbal people. They are the traditional custodians of the land on which we gather here today. We pay respects to their elders, past and present. We extend that respect to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders peoples here today. And today it is a great pleasure to have Nehama Lewis's talk. Nehama Lewis grew up in Australia, but has since lived in other places around the world and is now the Deputy Dean or Associate Dean? I'm not sure.
Vice Dean, yeah.
Vice Dean, sorry. The Vice Dean at the Faculty of Social Sciences at the University of Haifa. It's kind of special for me because I have my PhD from that faculty from about a decade and a half ago. So Nehama has conducted extensive research on information engagement and health behavior change. And she's also, among many other things, a PI on a prestigious European Marie Curie grant. And we are very much looking to hear her talk. Thank you, Nehama.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. I'll try and stick within the 15-minute limits, and feel free to let me know if, like 2 minutes before. So what I'm going to talk about today is kind of a high-level talk on something that I've been working on both in academia and in the private sector, which is both challenging and eye-opening as far as the differences between like classic scientific research and research in what people would refer to as the real world. So I speak here from both positions. So I will talk really quickly about behavioral science, since this is like, for people who know the material, I'm sorry if some of this is obvious, but it's more like an overview of to locate people as far as where I'm going to go with this. I'll talk again roughly about theories and concepts that I use and how useful they are in practice, about the role of AI and opportunities and challenges, and I'll try to get to a quick discussion about ethics and open that up to any questions. So my work focuses on what seems like a magic trick sometimes when I speak to people at conferences and parties. Basically, what I like to do and what I study is how to predict and influence people's behavior. And this is a fascinating area as far as I'm concerned. And one of the main guiding principles is that in order to influence human behavior for any purpose, for good, for bad, for example, to get people to quit smoking, to go do a breast cancer check, to save for retirement. So in multiple fields, this is not just about health, even though I focus on health, it can be applied widely. In order to influence any specific behavior that's under people's control, you have to understand what predicts that behavior. So behavioral science basically talks about 4 different ways in which you can get people to change their behavior. The first 2 are not as interesting as far as I'm concerned because they're mostly related to government and policy. They're useful, but in a democracy, there's a limit to how you can apply these. So the first would be just tell people they can't. Right? Like in New Zealand, you just say you can't buy cigarettes. The second is make things highly incentivized or disincentivized. And again, you can do that with children. I find that there are limits to this when it comes to behaviors such as like junk food. There's a limit to how much you can tax things. So what I focus on in my research is option 3, which is persuasion, which is the idea that you need to work cognitively to give people reasons to agree with you and change their behavior, which is very, very difficult. And we know this based on research and theory. People don't like to change their behavior. So persuasion is challenging. The fourth is the area of nudging. So choice architecture. You steer people toward default behaviors. That works some of the time, but it can't work all of the time. So I believe that a mixture of 3 and 4 are good approaches. So within behavioral science, there are 3 main groups of theories that I work with. The first are theories of behavior change, which tries to organize models into a number of specific predictors of behavior. So if you know the behavior and you know the model, you can think about specific things you could say to influence those predictors. The second group of models is relate to how we process information. So once you know what you need to say, the second group of models tells you how can you say it. Should you present it as a story? Should you present it as information only? How can you match what you want to say to your audience? So that's the second part of the puzzle. They're not competing, they're complementary. And the third group of models relates to message effects, which gets more into the details of design. Who should be in the message? Should you have like different kinds of messages, that kind of thing. So this is a very, very broad scale of the entire area of persuasion. So within the first group, models of behavior change, there's a ton of models that have been tested really widely in the private sector, in the public sector, in research, and they're proven to be quite effective at predicting behavior. So I taught these before I worked in the private sector, and I assumed that they worked, but I've actually had the opportunity to test these in the real world, and they work quite well as far as predicting behavior. They explain a lot of variance in behavior. So these models include theory of planned behavior, social cognitive theory, health belief model, and others. And what's similar with all of these models is that they aim to predict specific behaviors, and you can apply them broadly. So the same models should work in Australia, and it should also work in Israel. You just, maybe vary the content, but the model should work across behaviors and population. So this is what people were doing in academia for years. They would basically use these models to predict behavior and then design messages to influence the constructs in the model. I'll give you an example of what this looks like. So let's say you have a neighbor who parks awfully, right? So you decide that you need to persuade them to park more normally. So what you want to do is you want to influence their parking behavior. So you could do that in a number of ways based on an existing model you could apply. You could try and make them think differently, change their attitude about how they park. You could tell them that everyone disapproves of what they're doing, which is relate to norms, or you could show them literally how to park normally. So according to this model, it just organizes the ways in which you could approach the person and try to influence their intention and behavior so that they didn't park like this. The caveat being that this only works when people are rational. So if your neighbor is not rational, this is not going to work. But it does have a lot of validity in other contexts. Within the second group of models, two of the models I like to work with are dual models of information processing. So these models are really useful to help you understand how to say things. So if you, for example, preparing a talk for an audience, what level of detail should you get into? So what these models do is they organize people into two groups, and this is really well done in Thinking Fast and Slow with Daniel Kahneman's book and a lot of other classic literature. The idea is that when people are shown information or an ad or a message, they'll either think about it deeply and they'll listen to what you're saying, or they'll look at it very superficially. So if you can predict exactly what route they're going to take, you can organize what you say in a way that will be more interesting and persuasive. So this model helps you as well when you're doing behavioral science, because it basically organizes audiences according to two basic questions. Is this audience knowledgeable? Do they know what I'm going to be talking about? And are they motivated? Based on the answers to these two questions, you can organize how you say things to be more persuasive. So just wrapping up the basic logic of persuading people and behavior change, the idea would be that once you understand your audience cognitively, and once you understand what motivates their behavior, you can say things that are more likely to influence them and say it in a way that's more likely to be persuasive. And then when you have channel options, you can also find them. You can say, okay, I know my audience are on TikTok. I'm going to say this. I'm going to say it in this format. I'm going to say it through this channel. So what it is putting pieces of the puzzle together in a way that increases the chance that you'll get what you want, which is to influence people. So does it work? Yes, it works pretty well. It's been applied broadly during the COVID pandemic, for example. It's been applied for recycling campaigns. We know a lot, and there's a ton of research. I'll show you in a couple of slides a few really good books on this if you want to read a bit more. But the problem is when you do this in academia, you run a study, and I've done many of these in my research. But once you do one study, you can't scale that more broadly. You basically learn about that sample, that context, and so it's very time consuming. And also it hasn't been tested until recently outside of research, outside of the lab. And a lot of these models predate social media and AI, which is both a good thing and a bad thing, because it means that you can use all that technology to work with the models, but also it makes you question, are these models still valid? And then the issue of measurement validity, there's a whole bunch of nice approaches coming out of Milkman's work in Penn on mega studies and the idea of open science. So the methods is changing as well. So getting to the second part of the talk, data-driven behavior prediction is a total game changer. The fact that we can now collect massive amounts of data on people helps us predict behavior much better. We basically can increase the likelihood that we'll know what somebody's going to do. And we can tell them things that are effectively tailored exactly to that person, and you can do it at scale. This is both a good thing and a bad thing as far as ethics and who is doing this and why they're doing it. Other issues, and this may be for the statisticians in the house, is that when you just run the data that you have, it's noisy. And so you get sometimes spurious predictors, and unless you have a human there to interpret the data, you can easily make mistakes as to what you think you're seeing in the data versus what is actually influencing human behavior. Another issue is you can only work with the data that you have. So if you have a bunch of marketing data, it doesn't really tell you much about the psychology of the behavior. It doesn't tell you why people are going to do a particular thing, choose a product, that kind of thing. And it doesn't often tell you, based on the results, what to say to people. So it can be helpful, but without an understanding of the psychology of human behavior, it's quite limited, which is where the mix of social science and technology comes in. So as a bottom line, data-driven analysis tells you what is correlated with behavior, but not why people make any decisions that they make or how to influence it. So it's quite limited. So then when you take all of these books, and again, these are some of my favorite books that I use when I teach, the idea is that these books are great as an academic resource, but can you scale the information there to influence behavior change at large? And in my opinion, the answer is yes, you can, if you know what you're doing, but you need a combination of skills. So you take the insights in these books, including some of the models that I talked about, information processing, behavior change models, and then you combine these models with segmentation. So the data tells you where people are. You can send them messages that influence their behavior, and you can also work at a massive scale. You can understand what you can say to different people and then see who looked at your message and who changed their behavior. And you can also use the big amounts of data that we have today to really do fine-tune segmentation and then create what I refer to in my work in the private sector as decision factors. And then say, okay, based on what I know about this particular segment, I think that what they would want to know relates to this construct. So I'll show you briefly some evidence that this works. So this is from my work in the private sector at a company called MedOrion, which I worked for them for 6 years, and then I took on a different role. So I'm not working with them at the moment, but I really strongly believe in what they do, and it works. So they work with insurance companies, and they try to improve adherence to taking statin medications. So together we designed a campaign that showed, we did a randomized control trial, and we showed statistically significant differences in people who saw our messaging in the campaign, who then took their statins, which we used objective pharmacy data to verify, and that compared to people who did not see the campaign. So again, does it work? Yes, it can work. Some of the benefits of this approach using behavioral science and AI-driven segmentation, you can use the strongest designs. So you can use randomized experimental designs, which I'm a huge fan of, to show evidence. So you don't need to compromise on how you're doing the research. You can also tailor what you're saying and how you're saying it. And it's something that's very scalable. You can do this at a massive scale across different populations, different countries, different cultures. You can tweak it as you go. If it's not working, you can analyze the data, see what's going wrong, how you can fix it. But it's also not something that you make up as you go. It's based on empirical evidence, and it has a scientific foundation. So it works because of the science. That's part of the reason why it works. So when I work with people in the private sector, often you have two different logics coming to the table. You have the business logic and you have the science logic. And the science logic is sometimes different. So the business logic will sometimes push for engagement data as an outcome, whereas I will always look at behavior change as an outcome. So you have to align some of those expectations, and you have to define things very specifically so that you're measuring what each side thinks they're measuring. Yeah, I'm almost done. So as far as the challenges for companies working in this area, like big finance companies or any companies that's working in the area of behavior change, one of the reasons they don't work with behavioral science is because they didn't work with behavioral science in the past. So you have what's called the status quo bias. People don't like risk. And so the risk aversion and sunk cost fallacy are barriers to adoption and changing people's mindset. Another issue is speed. Researchers sometimes need time to analyze data, and they need time to measure effects. And people in the business area sometimes want things quickly. They want to say, did the campaign work? Show me evidence. And that's not how things work sometimes in the scientific arena. You need to trust people. So I worked with engineers, mathematicians, finance people, data people, and we all trusted each other that we had the relevant expertise. Another issue is data protection. I dealt with very sensitive health data from people in big insurance companies, and the privacy and security of that data is paramount. There are sometimes knowledge gaps that you have to get over. Like I didn't know a lot of the back end of the engineering side, and I had to learn as much as I could very quickly. They didn't know about my side, so I had to teach them. And the implementation costs, you need to develop a whole team sometimes for behavioral science within organizations. And lastly, I'm going to just briefly talk about ethics. As you all know, Cambridge Analytics is an example of what not to do and how not to manipulate people by what you know about them. So when you collect big amounts of data on people, you also can use that for nefarious purposes. So in persuasive technology, one of the main issues is ethics, that what you are doing should be of benefit to the population you're targeting. It should be based on scientific research and evidence, not driven by intuition or creative. You have to protect people and their data, and don't be creepy about it. Like you can't write to people and say that you know private things about them, and you can't say things that aren't true. So that's something that's really important, not to present information that is misleading or inaccurate. And the last slide, the issue of ethics is sometimes campaigns go wrong, and you have to be transparent about that. Sometimes you have unintended effects. You can create fear, reinforce stigma, create anxiety. You have to think about these as much as possible and measure them. There's a problem related to algorithmic bias in health. For example, if some subgroups have worse health outcomes or gaps, you may inadvertently reinforce those gaps in the code. You also have to allow people to say no. They can opt out. They can say, I don't want to get messaging from you. And you have to be accountable and transparent. You have to be clear as to what you're measuring, why you're measuring it, and what you can expect. That's it. I hope I was within my time limit. So I'm happy to get any questions. If anyone wants to follow up also about any of this, I have an unusual name, so you can find me very easily LinkedIn, Twitter, that kind of thing. So I'll just stop sharing here. Okay.
I'll clap for the rest of the audience. Thanks a lot.
Sure.
Yeah, that was very interesting. Perhaps somebody has a question or two. I also have a few. I thought. Hi, Judy. Yes, go ahead.
I guess I'm more from the data analysis perspective. I'd wonder if you could tell us a bit more about one of the projects and the data analysis. I realise that that's not your main focus. It would have been a collaboration, right?
No, I work pretty closely actually with the data people. I'm very quantitative. Like when I design a study, I make sure I'm on top of all the measures and, make sure the randomization is done properly. And if you look at my papers, I'm completely a total numbers nerd. So I work with the people who write the code to adjust the code when I worked in the private sector. But I think within data analysis, there's many different tasks, but you definitely have to have an understanding of what data you want to collect, why you want to collect it, how you're going to clean it, how you're going to interpret it, what you need to control for example. So if anything, I think my grounding in a quantitative methods was a really good way to get into the private sector, because I came in knowing like the strict logic of experiments, and then I had to understand how that works in the field. So as an example, unrelated to my work in this sector, I worked with people in the University of Haifa's computing science team. So they worked on an EU project for a wearable, it was a wearable and an app to promote walking among cancer patients. So I was their behavioural consultant as far as how we would design it, how we would measure it, what content we would say. And so I think that works really well together. So they definitely know a lot more than me about the computational aspects, but the combination can work really, really well, in my opinion. I hope I answered your question.
Yeah, I just wondered which of your papers was that? Just out of curiosity.
So the one with the computational group is under review at a proceedings at the moment. But there's a paper, if you look up Chodik et al., it's work that I did with Meta Ryan at the company that I worked for. We did a Facebook campaign to promote HPV vaccination. So that paper is actually a pretty good example of a campaign that had unintended effects, like it had positive effects and negative effects. Unfortunately, I had this in extra slides. I didn't have time to get to it, but if you have any questions about that paper, feel free to be in touch.
Okay, thank you.
No worries.
Thank you, Judy. Are there other questions or thoughts? Hey, Stephen.
Yeah, hi. I was thinking about an application for what you're describing and what would be useful. Risk management, I could see this being an area of interest. Just a background that I'm what's called an accredited person, or I was, I've retired now, but I still remain interested in the subject. And as an accredited person, I'm not at the top of the tree. I'm backgrounds in nursing, mental health, nursing in particular, and I've had different roles over the years, but the one I found most energizing in terms of seeing good patient outcomes is in really sophisticated risk management as part of a team process. It's an individual process, but essentially it needs a team to implement good risk management in the community. I'm not talking about so much in the hospital. In the hospital, it's more custodial and can't be really creative and change outcomes there. But in people's homes, I guess I've been energized by seeing people who would fit the criteria of a schedule, whatever language you're used to, but they not actually be admitted and use the community team to support, review medication, review the risk daily. So they're essentially, someone is essentially meeting the criteria of a schedule, but are not incarcerated. What happens there, the whole family are educated and the outcome in the future. And there's been a lot of studies to show this is much more sustainable. People don't have relapses if you get this initial process correct. So, as close as optimal is probably a better word. It's not a black and white thing. I haven't, risk management is kind of it is a science, but it's also an art, just looking at good practitioners who have a range of disciplines. It's not always, some people have surprised me in their discipline is not necessarily a psychiatrist, but, so how to put this to a question? Yeah, I'm not quite, I can see that this epidemiological, that's perhaps the wrong word, but this looking at the data and just seeing what doesn't work, what makes a difference, what doesn't make a difference. I think this is an area that I don't know. I wonder rather if this is an area, risk management is an area where this science could really highlight future directions, really, because
Yeah, I think there is a lot of work being done actually in that area.
Okay.
I think the COVID pandemic really moved a lot of patient outreach to Zoom and, you know, telemedicine. And so there's a ton of literature now. So there's teams working on, you know, helping people at home so that they don't have to be dealt with in the hospital system, both for themselves, but also, you know, not to overburden the system. I'm not sure that all of it is driven by behavioural science. I think a lot of it's primarily medical and tech, which is not necessarily a bad thing as long as the outcomes are good.
Oh, sure. I'm not excluding that either. I'm talking about the decisions made to get that balance right of medical and tech, because that's where success is, really.
Yeah.
Okay, so I should, as I say, retire, but I'll hunt up some of that literature and just see, because I remain curious, because I see that's what's going to make.
Yeah, things are going there.
So, can you point me in a direction of anything in particular that I should be looking up? I think with
I
meets
can
and-
definitely follow up. If you look up there's a project called Capable that was funded by the EU, which is the project that I worked on at the University of Haifa. So they do kind of alongside the lines of what you're talking about. So I would look at them and see what reports they have out and what deliverables and papers they have from that project. Could be useful.
Capable EU Haifa.
Yeah.
I'll just searching combining.
What's that? Yeah, the project is EU funded through Horizon.
And is there a specific name that I should follow up? Is there a person of interest that maybe is
Mol Peleg is the point person in the University of Haifa. She's Professor Mol Peleg at the Computational Methods Division.
Can I trouble you to put that in the text?
Sure, no worries. I can do that. No worries.
Thank you.
I've actually put the Capable project.
Oh, perfect. So that's in there.
And here's more Perlick. Thanks, Steve. Maybe I'll ask a final question, unless somebody wants to. I'll ask this, and maybe we'll close. So, Nehama, in your work, I find it first of all very interesting, and I'm sure that the COVID pandemic also.
It was a lot of work
because it was all about behavior.
Yeah.
So my question is, when in your modeling process, do you think more individual or societal? Because with social media, you get these spikes of, sometimes you understand perhaps where.
Yeah, that's a good question, because within behavioral science, the models are largely individual, but some things are cultural and broader than the individual. And so if you're using an individual model to explain a social phenomenon, it's not going to work very well. So in that respect, you sometimes need a combination of things. You need to change like the culture around certain behaviors. For example, smoking. Smoking is both individual, but also cultural and social. And you can have a policy element. So you can increase taxes and you can de-incentivize smoking and also work on the individual piece. So most behaviors are kind of like a proportion of each. And it's actually easiest to focus on behaviors that are very much individual. Those are the ones you can see the most change in.
Gotcha. Yeah. Well, great. That's very exciting. We're trying to cap it at a half-hour
Sure.
interval, just because Nehama will get on with her Israeli
Yeah.
workday, and here in Australia we'll continue with our work evening. Since a few of us are online, we can thank you again. And
Sure. Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
thanks a lot for joining, and
Sure.
thanks a lot, Nehama. Okay.
No worries. Bye.
Thank you. Cool work.
Thanks.
Bye.
Thank you.